So welcome, Social Capital Week. It's the Wednesday. My name is Russell Todd from Grow Social Capital, one of the founding directors. I'd like to introduce Andy and Matt, fellow colleagues on Grow. Our fifth beetle is Sarah Tamsin. She's not with us though at the moment, but she's another one of the team. And it's a real warm welcome, Chris O'Conness, to Mark Jones in Wrexham. Shemai, Mark, how are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks.
So we're going to be talking with Mark, and Mark's going to be telling us a little bit about the origin story, the background to Saith Seren, which is a community-owned pub in Wrexham, right in the heart of the town in northeast Wales. Let me just share some slides here, and we're going to look at essentially how that facility, that community hub, is more than just a pub, but how it's an important component in that town as a generator, an incubator of this thing that we call social capital that we've been talking about all week. Well, we talk about it a lot, but specifically this week as part of Social Capital Week 2021. Specifically the focus on, it being more than a pub, as I say, but a focus on it and its artistic, its cultural, linguistic connections and value to the town and beyond. So Mark, tell us about Saith Seren.
Yeah, it started off as one of those light bulb moments when you walk past a pub that's been closed for a year, and as you can see, it's a lovely listed building right in the heart of Wrexham, really a slightly run down part of Wrexham, as it turned out. And it was about 10 years ago, walking past it thinking that'd be a great place for a Welsh centre. And that same year was the National Eisteddfod in Wrexham. So we wanted a legacy, and we formed a bit of a committee, started talking about how we could raise money. We always wanted it as a co-op, as a community-owned co-op, and we were looking to buy the building. The pub co that owned it were one of those, there's no easy way to say this, bunch of vultures, and they'd phone me up and say, this pub is going to auction tomorrow in Manchester, it's going to auction tomorrow in Birmingham, are you going to bid for it? And so we were frantically trying to find a way to raise the money. We couldn't raise the 150,000 they wanted for it in the kind of timescales, i.e. 24 hours that they wanted. So we started talking to a housing association who agreed to purchase on our behalf and give us a 21-year lease. And given that we only officially launched it in the Eisteddfod in August 2011, we moved very quickly from there, and we were opening the doors in January 2012. So we've just celebrated our 9th year, I would say, of being open, but actually, obviously, we're closed. And we're planning for our 10th anniversary next January, which I sincerely hope we will be open for. It's been touch and go, I'll be honest with you. We've had moments where we have thought we would have to close because of various challenges. We had a broken sewer that stank the place out, closed down our food offer, everything. We couldn't trace it. We thought it was dead rats. It was all sorts of things. That was a challenge. We also, if I'm being frank, the rent has been a challenge, and that's why we're planning, when things permit, to purchase the building, because we think we can do more with it. And generally, we've sort of had to do everything ourselves. We've done it the hard way. I think a lot of people have been frustrated that when they see other organisations getting funding to develop these sort of Welsh centres, but we've done everything ourselves, and ironically, that's made us stronger in the long run. We haven't had money showered on us, and we had to use our own resources. We had a spell about 4 years ago when Aaron Jones of Say Something in Welsh launched an appeal for us because there was another threat to our existence, and we got 200 people paying in £10 a month and that effectively pays our rent. So that has made a huge difference. But I think in terms of the difference it makes to Wrexham, because for those who don't know it, Wrexham is 10 miles from the border with England, but it's very clearly a Welsh town. In terms of the language, there are more Welsh speakers in Wrexham County Borough than there are in Carnarvon, and there's about 1,000 adult learners in Wrexham County, and you've got a lot of people who've been through the Welsh medium system in terms of schools, but obviously we're not. It's not a community language outside of some places such as Rhos. And there was a tendency for it to be viewed as the language of the school, of the chapel, of Merched Wawr, very much minority sports, which are not much use to people like me who don't attend Merched Wawr or church or chapel or whatever. And having something physically in town that was a social hub was really important, I think, for the language. But also this was a pub that had traditionally been a live music venue, and we thought that was very important to revive as well. And so every Saturday night we have a live band, a local live band. Every Wednesday we have a live jam night. We've also got bilingual folk nights. We have regular Friday nights with Welsh language bands and events. We've put on music, poetry, comedy. We've had Stephen Parry there doing his anecdotes. We've even had theatre there, which was a bit of a squash, but we managed to get away with it. We've become that hub for not just your Welsh speakers, but that big group of Welsh learners or people who are on the spectrum, so to speak. I see the Welsh language as a spectrum where you've got a small group of people who are very comfortable in Welsh, and you've got perhaps another group of people who know no Welsh, and on the spectrum you've got a load of people who kind of move up and down, and we're trying to get them to feel comfortable using Welsh, and that's what Saith Seren's about. But I think we also offer more than just something for Welsh speakers, because we've become a hub in terms of community events. There's a large Portuguese community in Wrexham. They've got a room upstairs which they use for all sorts of events. We've had Black History Month events there, and generally if there's a fundraising event, or there's a charity, they'll come to us looking for, can we hold an event here to raise some money? So I think we've established ourselves over the past 9 years as that go-to place. We'll always help out, whether it's with the football fans or the local hospice. We'll put on a quiz or a musical night, and we'll offer something for them. So I think, I wouldn't say we've got this grand scheme. I think just surviving is enough. There's that overused cliche in Welsh, yma o hyd, we're still here. And David Iwan sings about it. The football club has adopted it as a bit of a theme, because the football club almost disappeared. And we've kind of gone underwater a couple of times and bobbed back up. And I like to think just surviving can be an enormous success, really. You can see here from the slides, it's the side of the pub. The pub, in case you're wondering why is it Saith Seren, it's literally the translation of the original 7 stars. It was known as the 7 stars. The 7 stars came from the Plough, obviously a fairly traditional pub name. But the guy who opened it was I think a bit of a snob, and he wanted something a bit different. And he developed, he called it the 7 stars. And there was actually a music hall, which later became a cinema alongside it. You can't really see it from the pictures here, but we are quite interested in that building. If we ever got the funding and had the resources, that would be an interesting one. But the reason why I've included the picture of the litter pickers is that was an initiative last year where people wanted to clean up the town centre, and the automatic place to go to, in a way, was Saith Seren, because that's where all the community stuff happens. You can see the live music there, Welsh band, guys standing on a table randomly with a guitar. That's fairly typical of an average Friday or Saturday night, where you've got a lot going on, and that's what keeps us going. But I think we've won our place, if you like, in terms of the town's accepted us. And it's been interesting over the past few years. It was a rundown part of town, to be honest with you. You can just see in the top picture there, the grey building on the right is now T Pawb, which is the art centre. So that's turned a market and a car park essentially into an art centre, an arts hub, which has been a boost for this part of town. There's also Techniquest has moved into a building very close, and there's just a little bit of a buzz developing. I like to think we're part of that buzz, and hopefully we can build on that as we come out of lockdown. Town generally has, I think, got a lot going for it. We hit the bottom in terms of town centres a lot before a lot of other places. So we've already started the bounce back, and I'm hoping that Saith Seren can be a part of that. So I don't know if you want to ask any questions. I've rambled on.
Thanks, Mark. I'm tempted to question whether there's ever been any snobs in Wrexham, but I'll take your word for it. I think it's an interesting thing to point out with respect to T Pawb. Translates as everybody's house, and again, it's very much another riff, I suppose, on this sense that people can make use of spaces, people can make and communities, when the people come together, can make constructive, creative, fun use of spaces if they're given a chance. And I know you've got some fairly sort of strong views on how the Welsh Government rolled out some of its Welsh language hubs back about a decade ago now, I think, and another one in Cardiff, I think, has shut. You're still going, albeit you faced a number of challenges. I don't think anyone ever says this is easy, and I think you've got the scars and the bruises to prove it. But you're still, notwithstanding the pandemic, you're still swinging the punches. Which and I use that metaphor deliberately, given you've got that little homage to possibly my favourite ever boxing name, the nominatively determinist Johnny Basham, who was, albeit for Newport, but was a boxer that settled in the town. And you are sort of still swinging those punches, but it's interesting that you talk about this sense that actually we can begin to have something a bit more cohesive and a bit more, beyond essentially the four walls and a roof of the pub with respect to T Pawb and Techniquest and some other things taking place.
Yeah, I think having a physical place though is really useful. Even if it's just to store stuff and be a meeting place. We just recently, last week, there was a group of volunteers that wanted to provide some kind of goodie bags for NHS workers, hugs for heroes they call themselves. And they just wanted physically a space where they could assemble these bags with all the different goodies in. And that's something we could provide, and I think there's an awful lot of that goes on where we're seen as that go-to place. And we can offer something that, we don't have to go through any big bureaucracy and obviously you do your risk assessments as you would with any event and business. But, I think we're in touch with that kind of, Wrexham is a very community, it's a relatively small town, it's a very close community. There's loads of different overlaps in terms of, the music scene and the political scene and the volunteering scene. We've got a very active social enterprise culture in Wrexham in terms of, there are the Car Park Partnership and until very recently the football club and Plasmatic Leisure Centre, just some of the social enterprises in the area. And, we've all fed off each other. We've all taken inspiration and learnt off each other. and supported one another, I think, and that's really important. And I think the point with the Seven Stars, as it was that it had been closed for a year. The pub co couldn't make it work as a commercial enterprise, but we've made it work as a social enterprise, and that's the way forward as far as I'm concerned. Because you're seeing retail pull out of town centres. They don't see a future for town centres, and what you're seeing coming in its place really is your T-Pawb, your TechniQuest, which is a sort of public thing, the Enterprise Hub. Yes, on the back of that, you're seeing commercial enterprises, local commercial enterprises, such as restaurants and pubs opening as well, because they've given a bit of confidence that actually this town can work.
I'm going to gloss over the reference to risk assessments while there's a picture of a guitarist on the table. But Andy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, Mark, a truly inspiring story you're sharing here. I live in Barry. Imagine I'm walking down my street and I see the equivalent of a closed Saith Seren. What advice would you give to me if I said, right, I'd love to achieve what you guys have done in Wrexham? What advice would you give?
Walk on. No. That would be the easy answer. Honestly, one thing at the moment is there are loads of empty pubs going for a song, because unfortunately I'm of an era where the pub was where you went to meet your mates. That's where you did your socializing and all sorts of things really, and that's changed, especially over the past 10 years. I think people have they socialize at home more often. We've all got social media, we've all got smart tellies, you watch your sport there, but people still like that communal experience, and it might be the rugby, it might be the football, it might be Christmas, it might be a special event. They want to socialise, and that's where pubs come into themselves massively. What I would say to people is, a pub is for life, not just for Christmas. You've got to care for a pub if it's going to be a successful social hub. But I would say that there's still a need for it. There's still a demand for it. Because all our income comes from what we put on, events and activities. We have something on most nights of the week. People don't go to our pub just to drink. Drink is a big part of it, but it's not a boozer for boozers. It's a pub where you go to do something specific or see something specific, and that's what I'd suggest you need to do is have an USP, to use the horrible jargon. Our USP is that we're the only Welsh bar in town, and I do think we've encouraged others to think, actually we could do bilingual menus, or we could do bits and pieces, we can fly a flag outside and that sort of thing. So I think we have had a little impact. We've raised the profile of the Welsh language in Wrexham, and that's part of the job as well, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a great answer, Mark. When you were sharing that, it reminds me of a book I read called Collapse by a brilliant guy called Jared Diamond, about how different societies collapsed.
It's a good book.
And there's a chapter on Easter Island, which is, there's no trees on Easter Island, but once it was completely forested. And Jared Diamond posed the question, what was going through the mind of the person who chopped down the last tree? And it just sparked mind of what goes through the mind of the person who closes the last pub.
Oh, that's a horrible thought. Yeah.
Yeah, but you see the trend and stuff. It's a challenge, isn't it?
It's probably not somebody local. That's a significant part of the problem. So the impact of that isn't felt literally or metaphorically by, and it can be felt in different ways. So there's an economic one, but there's a cultural impact and a social impact. And I think that therein lies part of the problem, is too many of the decisions that affect town centres, communities, etc., are taken remotely. Now, I don't necessarily mean in a spatial territorial sense, but clearly that might have been the case with the pub when it was potentially up to auction in Birmingham, Manchester, etc. But but even in terms of, you know, hierarchies of power and decision making, it can feel really remote as well.
I think that's a really good point, because again, I think things have happened to Wrexham, and I don't think Wrexham is any different from any other town in Wales or the UK in that regard. You know, they've lost a lot of their identity by having these identikit retail outlets and out of town shopping malls and those sort of things. And those things are now going, because only what was it, 2008, we had a development called Eagles Meadow in Wrexham. And that was your all singing, all dancing shopping mall, you know, with Debenhams and M&S and Boots and all those things. And some of those shops actually moved out of the old town centre. And that was a starting point for quite a rapid decline in the town centre, as was. And of course, now Eagles Meadow is on its uppers, you know, all these high street chains pulling out, no real identity to it. But the old town, a very resilient old town, has been repopulated in a way by those small independents who've got that local connection. You know, these are local businesses, local shopkeepers or pub owners or restaurateurs who want to actually make a difference. And that, you know, it's a long way to go, but you do sense that actually we could reclaim the town centre and make it something, regenerate it in a very different way from that identikit. Because I think people now, you know, why do you go and visit a town or a city for a weekend? You know, what brings you there? Could be an event, you know, could be a festival or your special interest you've got. But more than likely, it's the kind of heritage, it's the buildings, it's the, you know, food and drink and all that sort of thing, which attracts you there. And if you've got something different, because I don't want to go to a town and just see the same shops and see the same offer. I want to see something unique. And that's what we've got to offer in Wrexham, as in every other town in Wales, something unique and something different. And, you know, you look forward to going to a town because you're going to see something different, aren't you? I'll shut you up.
I'll come in, Mark. I think this idea of giving this sort of really crucial need to give people a reason to visit is a really kind of key point, particularly around kind of pubs. And I see so many closing around us in Cardiff that you think that should be viable with a bit of imagination, and giving people a reason to go. Just opening the doors is no longer enough when, as you say, people are as comfortable, even more comfortable at home, and they've got, you know, all the sort of entertainments that you would have gone out for. And I think that's a really sort of appropriate metaphor for whole town centres as well. You've got to give people a reason to visit. And you know, I'm quite optimistic about town centres, because if online shopping is going to kill anything at sort of commodity level, I think it will be those big out of towns. And you're starting to see at last a bit of imagination in giving people a reason to go back into town centres. You know, what would be your message for anybody kind of looking at how we're planning that sort of recovery of town centres? How can we be more creative, and how can we engage communities more in kind of creating these exciting new reasons to come in and use town centres, do you think?
Yeah, it's there's so many strands to this, and I think the whole thing with online shopping is it's here to stay. You know, we've all done it, especially with the pandemic. So your small independents have got to get into that game as well, and there's probably a platform that needs developing for your Wrexham independents. You know, this is your go-to place. You know, we've got to be modern in that respect. But I think as well, because you're going to see a lot of empty shops, and you're going to see a lot of empty office space, because people have realised you don't need to physically be in an office 9 to 5 days a week. You're going to see a situation where those buildings get turned into accommodation, living space. Urban living, I think, is a great idea in theory, if it's done properly. What you don't want to do is build the slums of the future by cramming people in to inadequate housing with no leisure amenity, no green spaces, no parking, because it might be different in Cardiff and the cities, but Wrexham's public transport network is so bad. You cannot survive if you have to work outside the town centre. You cannot survive without a car, unfortunately, and it's an indictment of the public transport system that needs addressing. But like I say, there's all these strands. If you could get to a situation where you had a really good public transport system, I'm not asking a lot. I'm just saying, can you link the town centre up with the industrial estate, which employs 7,700 people? That's a pretty basic ask, and if we could do that, you could then start to think about, we can have a car-free kind of urban living scenario. And that urban living, I represent a ward. I'm a county councillor as well as doing this. I represent the area where Saith Seren is in the town centre, and I would say there's probably about 200 new flats being given planning permission in my ward alone in that part of the town centre. So it's happening already in a fairly haphazard way. But those 200 people or 200 households have got nowhere extra to go and relax and enjoy the sun or whatever it might be. So we've got to think about that. And of course, every individual planning development says this is a sustainable place to live. You don't need a car and you don't need amenity space is the jargon. Well, you do. You do need amenity space for 200 extra households and 200 potentially extra cars. And we've got to think outside the box in that sense and say, how are we going to cater for this to make it a good place to live? But the plus side of having those 200 households and more is that they will want to pick to the corner shop, or they will want to, grab something to eat after a day's work, and there'll be a cafe or a restaurant down the street, and they'll go for a pint and want to watch the football or whatever. So in that respect, that feeds into the sort of rejuvenation of the town centre. There's footfall there, whereas I'd say 10 years ago, footfall after 5 o'clock was disastrous. It was a really not a pleasant place to be at certain times, and that's changing, and that's for the better. But it needs a lot of vision, and I think councils and Welsh Government and other bodies involved have got to step up to the plate in that regard.
I think you've got to be very brave to take on car owners and car ownership. I think it's so entrenched. But I think you do need that political bravery to say, look, this might not be popular, but it's right. It's right for the environment. It's right for communities. There's a Welsh Government published today, I think, new housing guidance, and then very sort of front and centre in that is this move away from out of town and back into town centres and trying to prioritise housing in town centres. So, as I said, I feel kind of optimistic, even among the doom and gloom stories that we're seeing about the death of the high street at the moment, that things are starting to move in the right direction.
Just to answer that one, I think there's an understanding of what needs to be done. Everyone will bang on about better public transport, but they've got to deliver it. And at the moment, what we've got is a situation. Wrexham is a good case in point where we're going to get a £10 million transport hub around the train station, which will marry up the train and the bus services, which is a great thing. Makes absolute sense. But we haven't got any buses. So this could be a bus-free transport hub. And that's no good. So you need to put the you need to join the dots, otherwise you're going to be left with nice ideas, abstract concepts, but the reality is rubbish.
Mark, can I just pick up on a point? I mean, you told earlier a lovely story about how you're walking past the place and you had the idea, the moment of inspiration. What makes you different from the dozens of other people who must walk past the same place, maybe amused about wouldn't it be nice if something happened there? What is it about you think, without necessarily being over modest, that what were the ingredients in you think that made you respond differently and do something?
Yeah, I've always, again, more cliches, I'm afraid, but this was always about ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And I think it is quite extraordinary. People go, you're off your head, doing this, why you just go to another pub and be done with it type of thing. That would have been a lot easier. But I guess there must be a masochist in me, but where you think, yeah, let's do it, let's have a go, and I am one of these people that I'd rather try and fail than say, oh, that would have been a nice idea, and look back and say, oh, if only I'd done that, and I don't want to be one of those people. I'd rather I go and fail than not be on the pitch at all, I suppose. But it was always a cooperative effort. It wasn't me as this kind of all singing, all dancing. It was other people who did an awful lot of the legwork. I'm one of those light bulb people, and then I move on. I don't do the donkey work. So it's been great in that sense as well to be able to. I think after 5 years, I was chair of the board that runs it. And I was able to move back and just be an ordinary member of the board. We've got a new chair now, and he's kind of brought a new dynamism to it. And I think that's a really important point about any group like this, any voluntary group. You will get a massive surge of enthusiasm and work put in initially because people want to see this happen, and there's something tangible there. Give it 2 or 3 years and there's massive volunteer fatigue, and you start to fall out, well, not fall out so much as, people drop off, and people might think, well, it's not exactly what I thought it was going to be. And, so you've got to rejuvenate, and you've got to be, take a step back from your day-to-day activity. And the day-to-day activity is absolutely key, in terms of putting events on and making sure it's working. But you also need to step back and say, where do we want to go with this? So that's why we want to buy the place. That's why we want to redevelop the upstairs and maybe even look further afield. I'm not seeing the questions, by the way.
There's a good question from Stephanie. Steph, do you want to unmute yourself and share your question? Brilliant question.
Yeah, it's just a quite a direct one, Mark. You referred earlier to a 20-year lease negotiated through a housing association, and some housing associations are very ethical, and others are more aggressive in the way in which they operate. So I'm not assuming that there's any guarantee that at the end of the next 10-year period, you'll be then able to renew the lease at the same kind of rate that's affordable for the community. So it's a question about how have you introduced some form of asset lock or other safeguarding. I know that Gallery up in Carnarvon introduced these models to support not just their own buildings, but also their neighbours from any kind of inflation of land costs, etc. So how are you going to, as the collective, protect your cultural capital and ensure that you can continue at Saith Seren after the end of this 20-year period?
Yeah, it's a 21-year period. In a way, I'll be honest with you, because we've had those ups and downs, we haven't looked beyond the 21 years in a detail, except to say that we are, I think 2 years ago, we started on the journey of purchasing the building. And we've had lots of discussions with the Housing Association on that basis. And I think without the pandemic, we would have completed. Obviously, that's held us back. There was so much uncertainty associated with the pandemic. I think once we're able to reopen and get back to some kind of normality, we will revisit that. And that would be the greatest way to secure the building, obviously for the long-term future, would be to have ownership, and that would then free us to do more of the things that we want to do without having to consult with the landlord first. And I think it gives us an asset. Of course, you know, we haven't been able to have an overdraft throughout the past 9 years. Not that I want an overdraft, of course, but you know, we have been very limited in what we could do because we didn't have any assets behind us. And I think we're in a position now, perhaps for the first time, where we have, you know, we're balancing the books, we've got some money in the bank, and we're in a position, and also, if we're honest, the housing association world has changed, and they're looking to offload non-core properties, so that puts us in a better place as well. So they from having an unrealistic sale price a few years ago have come back to a far more realistic price, which is closer to what we can afford. And we have had some support of the WCVA in terms of obtaining a mortgage to bridge the gap that we will have, but that will see us have ownership, I think, and that puts us in a far better place in terms of security. Like you say, in terms of 21 years, I think that would have started to play on our minds very shortly, and that won't be the case, hopefully.
Thank you. I just have a really quick follow-on question then. In
Sure.
terms of it sounds as if you've done a lot of work to ensure that there's a generative aspect to the space, so that almost all of the events that you're holding there are actually generating the income, so you're not reliant on funding. But up the road, well, that's 25 yards away, you've got TPAUB with a very, very different business model. So have you been, as an organisation, asked to support and advise TPAUB on their forward planning?
No, is the simple answer. We have a good relationship with them. I'd like it to be better, but generally we do have a good relationship. I think it is a very different prospect, isn't it? That they've got, and they may find themselves having to rely, like us, on income generated going forward, but they do have some leeway. I think they were guaranteed 3 years of funding, and they're now 2 years in. So we haven't been approached, is the honest answer.
I think you may well soon be. But yeah, okay. Jo at TPAUB is brilliant, by the way. I've met Jo and spoken to her. She's fabulous.
Agree. Totally agree.
Andy, something you say is around how important pubs are in a sort of social community sense. Pretty much think of any soap opera, UK soap opera, and there's a pub prominent, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, at Publicum, EastEnders, Coronation Street, the main stage is the pub, and just any thoughts there? Do we need a national pub strategy? Do you think that would, like, something there that recognises the significance of the pub, the cost to our communities of these places, that a bit like the last tree on Easter Island, if they're not there, things can't grow from. Do we need some sort of like national strategy for pubs? And I live in Barry, and I'm very influenced by Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, and I would suggest a Barry version would be Skittling No More, because nearly a third of the Skittle alleys have gone. So not only it's not about getting more people to do skittling, but the alleys, the places are not there to do the things. And that's the worry I've got, is that as soon as you mentioned the significance of physical place, once that's gone, that's a damn hard asset to get back, as your sweat and toil tends to be. So I just wondered, do you think we need some sort of national pub strategy?
I don't know, because I think they are so unique, and it's really interesting, because when we were looking to do this, and when we compare ourselves with other community-owned pubs in Wales, they're almost always the last pub in the village kind of scenarios. And so obviously those villagers feel very strongly that is an asset we don't want to lose. We're very different because we're one of 20 or 30 pubs in the town centre, or we were. And so there wasn't that kind of imperative. And also, of course, we didn't qualify for those rural development grants and all those sort of things which are available for villages. And that's been a challenge, of course, is that we don't fit neatly into many, strategies or whatever. We have sat outside that. I think, when you think about the importance now put on men's mental health and that sort of thing, I think, we, without realising it, without being explicit, pubs were the mental health centres, if you like, for a lot of people. That was where they went to socialise and chew the fat and talk rubbish. And that is quite important. And the money that goes into, the kind of men's sheds and those kind of, I wouldn't call them artificial. They obviously work, but the kind of there's a bid to recreate all that. And you're thinking, well, why don't you put that money into community-run pubs? That might be a way forward. And you engage more naturally. You don't have to create something artificial to bring people together. You've got a natural, traditional, historic hub there, haven't you?
What I call the critically mundane. You don't really notice these things until they've gone and written something on our blog to that effect on the Grow Social Capital website. I think there's a perverse logic almost though to what you were alluding to, in that the wheels start turning to save the last pub, but we've got to wait till we've got just one and it's threatened before something kind of happens. And I'm simplifying it, I suppose. But you've almost got to wait for it to get to a parlous situation before there's almost any effort to retain the investment. And I think that's a really kind of, like I said, a perverse sort of logic that seems to be part and parcel of the policy response. Maybe it's a planning thing. It is more complicated than that, obviously, but weird, really.
Of a strategy.
But I do agree with what Mark is saying, is that all pubs do have their unique features and elements, and I think there is a balance to be struck between something that isn't obviously national in focus and scale, but also celebrates and is still alert to that. And sometimes those things don't always happen. You've only got to point to the history of the Welsh language hubs, and I suppose to demonstrate that sort of point, that sort of top-down sort of approach. Perhaps it was a theme of the thing I was doing yesterday, with the seminar I was doing yesterday, for Wizard at Cardiff University. But to celebrate that uniqueness and to celebrate that community and social emphasis is important, but you don't tend to see it often in some of the policy strategies and things. And I think it is heartening that, you talk about WCVA, where they wrote a blog last year when we did the first Social Capital Week about how they recognise as part of their social investment strategies, but also the values and the ethos that underpin those programs. They do see a value in social forms of investment. It's in the title, but also sort of social activities that are very hard to quantify in any financial numeric sort of manner. And sometimes the sort of the desire to demonstrate outcomes and the processes imposed on the applicants can be quite suffocating in themselves of the activity that you want to sustain and develop and enhance.
Absolutely. I think, my limited experience of that whole grant application culture, it becomes a hoop jumping exercise, whereby the hoops take you ever further away from the original idea you had, that you're jumping through hoops and you're ticking boxes to meet some kind of fairly abstract qualification somehow, and really if we, I think a slightly more hands-off approach and less kind of top-down, whereby, and I get the need. You can't just say, "Here you go, here's a wad of cash. Go off and do what you fancy with it." There's got to be accountability. But I'm reminded of we were in Toulouse doing the Euro 2016 on Midsummer Night's night, 21st of June, and we couldn't understand why there were, like, it was a midweek and every bar, every street had live music on, and it was like jazz in one place, it was hip hop somewhere else, it was rock, it was folk, it was just bonkers, you know. And you thought, are they putting it on because it's the Euros? Are they, you know, is it a special festival? Turns out that the French mayors on, you know, the longest day of the year, longest night of the year, they have a kitty which they just dole out to all the bars and restaurants just to put on live music. And it's just such a simple idea. And it's not that kind of, is £200,000, you've got to jump through these hoops. It's just like, it's 400 quid, get yourself a band, get yourself a PA, you know, make this place buzz. And oh, it was fantastic. That would, if I was mayor of Wrexham, I don't want to be mayor of Wrexham, by the way, but if I was mayor of Wrexham, that's what I'd do. Every midsummer night, I would say, here's 400 quid, put a band on, put a different event on, make this town buzz. And you could do that in so many different ways, and it wouldn't actually cost you that much. And it would keep a lot of places in business.
And in the context of social capital, it's easier to spend £400. It's not clearly it's cheaper. It's probably more effective as well than actually trying to craft something that's 5-6 figures. That is a much bigger strategy. That's actually much harder to mobilise, isn't it? If you think about it, we're going to invite you to say a final word. But before you do, Mark, just want a quick plug. If people want to zap that QR code, takes you a whole wealth of sort of texts and recommend readings, resources, articles. Some of them are not very academic at all, very light touch, accessible, understandable around this concept. Quick plug as well for Jamie Grundy, who we're speaking with. Jamie's been to Saith Seren, big fan of that pub as well. He's author of 90 Minutes of Freedom. We're going to be speaking to Jamie a little bit later this evening, about which we'll be recording, as this has been, about how he observes sport and football in particular as a tool for rehabilitation and generating sort of strong, positive peer relations between people with convictions and in, well, hopefully due to be leaving prison in the case of Prescoid. Andy, Matt, Mark, any closing remarks, comments, observations?
Final word for you, mate. I mean, if you could do it all over again, would you do it all over again?
Yeah, I would. It's been, you know, a real roller coaster of a thing. You know, lots of good times, some very difficult times, but the difficult times always make it better when you come through them. I think we've established ourselves now after 9 years. I'm really looking forward to celebrating 10 years, getting back open again, and going, you know, moving on, I suppose, from those early days. I still see us as relative toddlers, you know, and we're entering the teenage years, and things could get a lot more interesting, should we say? I hope.
A massive thank from all of us here today, and really the people of Wrexham, the world. Thank you for doing what you're doing, mate.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
All the best.